Kellogg seems to have been slightly sidelined, but he was talking about increased sanctions last week. And he said at the moment, they're about 3 out of 10 on the pain level. We can put them up to 10.
Well, now, in what appears to reflect a change in position from the White House, Donald Trump has posted on Truth Social that Russia has been absolutely pounding Ukraine on the battlefield, and that as a result, he's strongly considering large-scale banking sanctions and tariffs on Russia until a ceasefire and a final settlement agreement of peace is reached. Well, we were promised a statement from the Oval Office, live from the president. That was due at 4. We're still waiting for that, but as soon as it happens, we will cross live to it. In the meantime, let's hear from Tim Marshall, foreign correspondent and author of Prisoners of Geography. Good afternoon, Tim.
Hello, Kathy. I'm looking at the White House live feed, and it says live Friday, March the 7th. Yeah. There are no more upcoming events today.
Oh, that's bizarre. Right.
I don't know what's going on there, but I mean, yes, because everyone's been briefed that there is one, but that says there's no more upcoming events. But we shall see, and I'm sure you'll take it as and when it happens.
Oh, well, we've got a live feed that says we'll begin shortly, so who knows?
Good.
Well, you know, everything's very orderly, as it has been for many weeks now. But you tweeted just before Trump did this post about sanctions, you tweeted, Trump's stance so far on Ukraine is pro-Russia. But now he's stampeded the Europeans into maybe paying for our own defence and bullied Ukraine into the minerals deal. It's possible down the line, if Putin won't do a deal, the heat will come on Moscow as well. You've been proved correct about 20 minutes after that, haven't you?
Yeah, it has come slightly earlier than I thought it would, but I always thought it would come. He said 2 days after his inauguration, I'll do this if Russia doesn't sign. He actually said, we can do it the easy way or the hard way. And then last week, I noticed that Kellogg, who is his Ukraine envoy, and I know Kellogg seems to have been slightly sidelined, but he was talking about increased sanctions last week. And he said at the moment, they're about 3 out of 10 on the pain level. We can put them up to 10. And it just got me thinking. And so today I thought, okay, it's time to say, hang on. There is another side to this. He will breathe heat, probably not as much heat, but heat on Russia at some point. But I didn't expect it to be within 20 minutes. And I do think Elon Musk is probably following my tweets and passed them along to him.
Obviously, must be the explanation. But do you think this is a sort of more of a sort of maximisation of pressure on both sides then, rather than a sort of change of heart that he's seen what's happening in Ukraine and thought, oh, maybe I got it a bit wrong? That doesn't sound very Donald Trump.
Yeah, it doesn't. Oh, heavens no, that would never happen. Maximum pressure, actually, just as an aside, that's coming on Iran. And there's been a flurry of stuff over the last 36 hours on that, but leave that to one side.
That is
interesting. I don't think it's maximum pressure on Russia, but I do think it's maximum pressure on Ukraine. I mean, the stuff that he's done to Ukraine actually has led to this thing that he's so horrified about, the horrible destruction of the infrastructure last night in Ukraine, because the Ukrainians now, because of the lack of intelligence that's been removed, can't see what's coming as much and target stuff that might be fired at them. So it's actually partly down to his actions, but it's much worse for Ukraine. But there are measures, it is true. They can go heavier on Russia, but I just don't think that scares the Russians as much as what he's done to the Europeans, and Ukrainians scare them.
Well, so maximum pressure on Russia would be to reinstate that military and intelligence support for Ukraine. Yeah, which isn't going to happen, we don't think.
No, not well. I think the intelligence could be reintroduced if and when the minerals deal is signed, which could easily be next week. On extra, what is threatened Russia with today? Tariffs, forget it. Imports
doesn't matter. It doesn't make any difference, does it?
No, they're down to the trade between them is down to something like 3 billion, which is a lot of money, but it's nothing simultaneously. I was reminded of something that happened in December 2022. A little thing just appeared on the US Trade Department's website, just a paragraph, and it was about, we are now insisting that all tankers having Russian oil going through the Bosphorus, which might be sold at a certain level, have to be checked. I can't remember the wording. Just a little paragraph. And what happened was a massive traffic jam on the Bosphorus, because what that paragraph meant was anyone that insured these Russian tankers was now terrified that they would fall foul of US sanctions. And so nobody did the paperwork, and so no Russian oil moved. And I thought it was a fantastic example of how America's economic warfare is actually as often as powerful as its military warfare. So I do agree with Keith Kellogg. They are only at three out of 10. And so it might concentrate minds in Russia, but it is not as heavy as what they're putting on Ukraine.
Yeah, fascinating. Well, talking about economic warfare there, there's a very interesting column in The Times today from Emma Duncan talking about how tariffs are a sort of self-inflicted economic wound for the US. They're harming the US economy. The EU will benefit. And she contends that Trump will make Europe great again. What do you make of that?
I'm not very good at maths. However, I know that economic conformity says tariffs equals inflation, and nobody wants that. And the American economy, of course, doesn't want it. But I also remember Trump saying, and again, I don't know whether it's right or wrong, a few weeks ago, he was talking about this, and he was saying, I proved it wrong last time. I did various tariffs last time, and there wasn't rampant inflation. So the quote you just gave me may well be correct, but it might not be. We're going to have to see what happens with these tariffs. And again, you have seen this week, he's already having made Mexico, for example, nervous. He's actually said, all right, let's give it another month to talk about it. But the key here is that the American car industry is so reliant on Mexico. You know, when you have a car that's built in America, actually, a bit of it goes across to Mexico. They do something there. It comes back to USA, goes back to Mexico. And so I think the famous thing this week was an $80,000 truck is now going to be $100,000. So he's happy to remove that sort of thing. But I think when it comes to Europe, I think he's got a stronger hand to play there.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. Tim Marshall, we still haven't seen any movement in the Oval Office, so who knows what's going on there. I think the only certainty is uncertainty. That's what I've been saying.
Always worth waiting for.
Exactly, always worth waiting for. I think we just got to wait and see all the time. That's what we're doing at the moment. So, as we have been discussing, there seems to be a chance that Donald Trump will impose banking sanctions on Russia, the first sign of pressure being applied on Moscow by this new American administration. Let's speak now to Tom Keatinge, who's Director of the Centre of Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute. Good afternoon, Tom.
Hi, Kathleen.
You probably heard Tim there talking about sanctions and then the fact that they really are very weak at the moment and could be a lot tougher, but, you know, not nearly as tough as what Trump has inflicted on Ukraine. What is your reaction to his latest post?
It's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I have always thought that as a deal doer, as somebody who, as Tim was referring to, loves the phrase maximum pressure, sanctions have got to be in his arsenal. And if he doesn't get his way, as we've seen with tariffs, he will use the sanctions to a greater extent on Russia. I was very surprised that on the third anniversary of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, of course, the Americans took no sanctions action against Russia. And so I wondered whether at that time back channels were saying to the Kremlin, we're not going to put sanctions on you now, unlike the Europeans and the Brits, but you better do what we want you to do, which is come to the table and negotiate. And if you don't, we will unleash sanctions in a way that you've never seen them before, to quote the president.
Well, what might sanctions as you've never seen them before look like? What would be an effective sanction regime on Russia? I've had, just to couple with that, I've had a text in from Mike, one of our listeners, saying Trump putting sanctions on Russia would be just performative. If he wants to get Putin's attention, then lean on the countries buying Russian oil. Has Mike got a point? What would be effective sanctions?
So Kathy, I'm sure you know that famous Monty Python sketch of the fish slapping dance. And frankly, for the last 3 years, the US, the EU and the UK have been doing the tapping bit of the fish slapping dance. The Americans have the ability to get out the big fish and to knock the Russians into the canal like that sketch. What we haven't done is we haven't really gone after oil, and your listener is correct. We've sanctioned tankers here, we've sanctioned tankers there, but we haven't gone after oil big time. And what we have also not done is gone after countries that choose still to buy Russian oil and therefore fund the Russian economy and the Russian military. Of course, the Americans produce oil. And what better way to make money for the great American people than to say to these countries that still buy Russian oil, hey, why don't you buy it from Uncle Donald? That makes money for the American people, and it takes money away from the Russian economy. So I think there are things that the deal doer Trump could do with sanctions that Biden and others haven't been willing to consider, and indeed could ramp up the pressure if they chose to do so.
Would other countries be on for that, though?
Well, there's this big fear, isn't there, and that's why we've tiptoed around the oil topic, that it would drive up oil prices, that it would create economic havoc around the world, including for those countries for whom this fight is nothing to do at all, in Africa or South America, wherever it might be. So, I mean, there is a risk of that. But I think we have to remember with Donald Trump, he is laser focused on the issue he wants to deal with on any given day, and to hell with any collateral damage. So from his perspective, he wants a peace deal, he wants the Nobel Peace Prize, and if there's collateral damage in order to get there, he'll worry about that. If he ever does, he'll worry about that later.
Well, let's talk briefly about the Ukrainian Prime Minister confirming that his country has received the first tranche of proceeds from Russian frozen assets from the UK. Just explain how big a deal this is and what is stopping the assets themselves being spent on supporting Ukraine.
So it was a big deal when it was announced last summer by the G7. I was slightly taken aback when Rachel Reeves and others fanfared the signing of this deal in the last week or so, because actually it was kind of old news recycled, which I know people love to do. So basically what this means is that the Russian central bank holds assets in various places around the world, in particular in Europe, about 200 billion euros worth. And those assets are sitting there and they're earning income. And that income is earning a profit for the bank that holds them, a bank called Euroclear. So just stick with me for a second. So what the UK and others are doing is lending to Ukraine money equivalent to the profit that Euroclear and other banks are making in order to finance their war or whatever it might be. So it's big numbers. It's $50 billion equivalent that's been agreed between the G7 coalition. The UK is in for a few billion. And yes, that first tranche has been agreed and will be paid, I think, in 3 tranches of 700 odd million pounds over the next 3 years. But
what's stopping the actual assets themselves being spent on? Because we keep hearing there are legal problems with it, but isn't it actually more a lack of political will?
It's 100% a lack of political will. I mean, if you get 10 lawyers in a room, you'll get 150 different opinions. There is a very clear legal argument that this could be done. And therefore, what needs to happen is the politicians, in particular, whoever happens to be the leader on the day in Germany and the leader, President Macron in France, need to basically say, we're going to lean into this. It's the right thing to do. But the concern is the technocrats, people like Christine Lagarde, the president of the European Central Bank, are saying, but, well, remember the euro sovereign debt crisis of 10 or so years ago. We've got PTSD from that. We don't want to do anything that might make people distrust the euro and crash the euro foreign exchange rate and all that sort of stuff. And so we need to tread very, very carefully. And meanwhile, people like the Saudis, who said it publicly last summer, are going, gosh, do we really want to give our money to European governments if this is what you might do to our money? Of course, the answer is, well, we won't do anything if you don't illegally invade a neighbor. But that, I think, has made people nervous, and therefore the politicians have chosen so far to demur.
Tom Keatinge, thank you very much for joining us, the Director of the Centre of Finance and Security at the Royal United Services Institute there.